Fox News alert, there are growing questions about the treatment of migrants at the southern border after an 8-year-old boy from Guatemala dies in U.S. custody. Good morning, I'm Rick Leventhal, live inside America's newsroom.
And I'm Anita Vogel. Bill and Sandra are off today. According to Customs and Border Protection, the child died at a hospital very early Christmas morning. He is now the second migrant child to die in U.S. custody this month. The tragedy has lawmakers demanding answers.
It's very troubling to me. You have two children who have died in CBP custody just over the last month. I want to find out how we improve conditions at Border Patrol stations amongst the CBP workforce that they can respond to kids in crisis or who need help. And I want to make sure that we put the well-being and welfare of those kids before we put any other concern.
William Lajeunesse is live in Los Angeles with the latest on this. William?
Well, Rick, what I'm told by agents in the field yesterday and this morning is the system right now simply cannot handle the overwhelming number of Central American immigrants flooding the border, especially families. 7,000 apprehended last November, 25,000 apprehended last month. And because of that, the Border Patrol and ICE are forced to shift migrants from place to place or simply drop them off at a bus station like this one in El Paso. More than 400 released Sunday and Monday because, again, there's nowhere to put them. The case of this 8-year-old Felipe Alonso Gomez, I'm told, illustrates the problem. According to CBP, here's the timeline. Agents apprehended this boy and his father near El Paso last Tuesday, December 18th. They were processed, given food and water. 2 days later, December 20th, they were transferred to El Paso. Then, 3 days later, because of overcrowding, they were transferred again to the Alamogordo station. A day later, December 24th, an agent noticed the boy looked sick and took him to a local hospital. He was admitted around 9 a.m., got Tylenol, an antibiotic, and ibuprofen, then released around 2 p.m. Agents took the boy to a highway checkpoint holding cell. 4 hours later, he began vomiting. They returned to the hospital around 10 p.m. He lost consciousness during transport and then was pronounced dead just shy of midnight on Christmas Eve. Now, CBP says the agents checked the boy's welfare more than 24 times over roughly a week. Champion Regional Medical Center is also going to come under scrutiny, of course, for releasing this boy, reportedly with a fever of 103. Now, this trip from Guatemala to the U.S. likely took the father and son several weeks. We're also told it is likely the two camped just south of the El Paso fence for several days in wet, freezing weather. Now, the funeral of Gomez follows that earlier this month of 7-year-old Jacqueline McKean, who also died in Border Patrol custody. Both ICE and Border Patrol say they have mandates to hold people who cross illegally, but then also court orders to release them in a certain number of days, whether there is shelter space or not. Every child right now in CBP custody is going to receive a medical checkup if they're under 10 years old, and the agency, Rick, has asked for medical help from the Coast Guard, the DOD, and FEMA to get that done. Back to you.
All right. William Lajeunesse in Los Angeles. William, thank you.
Well, Christmas has come and gone, and the partial government shutdown is in day 5 with no end in sight. President Trump standing firm on his pledge to fund the border wall, saying without it, the government will remain closed. Meanwhile, former acting ICE Director Tom Homan says more should be done to discourage people from entering the country illegally.
When you don't fix these loopholes, you entice people to come to this country because they think they can get to a safe sanctuary city. They don't have to obey the law because even if they get ordered removed, the Democrats don't want us arresting non-criminal aliens in the United States.
Rich Edson is live at the White House today with the latest on the shutdown. Hi, Rich.
Yeah, good morning, Anita. Democrats in the White House are a few $1 billion apart on funding for border security at the southern border, and so this shutdown, this partial shutdown, persists. President Trump was supposed to be down at Mar-a-Lago this week to celebrate the Christmas holiday. Instead, he is here pushing and demanding more funding for border security.
The people of this country want border security. You know, it's not a question of me. I'd rather not be doing shutdowns. I've been at the White House, and I love the White House, but I wasn't able to be with my family. I thought it would be wrong for me to be with my family. My family's in Florida, Palm Beach, and I just didn't want to go down and be there when other people are hurting.
The White House budget director says that this shutdown could persist into the next Congress. That takes over late next week. Anita?
And we know Congress is returning tomorrow. So what are we expecting? What are we expecting tomorrow?
So that's the 115th Congress. It's the last few days of that. The 116th Congress, when it takes over in the following week, the dynamics change a little bit. Senate Republicans, they'll still maintain control of the U.S. Senate, but it's the House where Democrats will take control there for the first time in 8 years. The presumed incoming House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, spoke to USA Today, talked about this issue. She said that the president's demands on the border wall keep shifting and said, quote, first of all, the fact that he says we're going to build a wall with cement and Mexico is going to pay for it, while he's already backed off the cement, now he's down to, I think, a beaded curtain or something. I'm not sure where he is. Pelosi also charges the president is using scare tactics on immigration to get more funding for this wall as this shutdown and this issue persist. Back to you.
All right, Rich Edson at the White House for us today. Thank you so much.
Well, with more on this, let's bring in Byron York, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner and Fox News contributor. Byron, thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Rick.
It's tough news for the government to handle, for anyone to handle, with a child dying in custody, and this can't help the president's cause.
No, and this shutdown seems to be the shutdown that nobody seems very eager to end. I mean, we're not seeing any sort of round-the-clock negotiations. We're not seeing new proposals every few hours. Basically, all the sides went home for Christmas, and they'll come back and talk about it maybe tomorrow. And I think the big reason for this is it's just a partial government shutdown. It is not a full government shutdown or even a half government shutdown. About a quarter of the federal government will be affected by this. The rest of it is fully funded through September of 2019. So we're just not seeing some of the effects that we would likely see if there were a full government shutdown.
But the longer that it goes on, the greater those effects will be, and the more likely it is that we will hear about it and the people who are suffering because of it.
Absolutely. I mean, another reason we haven't seen as much is, of course, it began on Saturday, and much of the country kind of went away for the long Christmas weekend, and now they'll start up, and you'll have government agencies like the Commerce Department, the Justice Department, the Agriculture Department, all being affected by this. So we will see some effects of it, but so far we haven't seen enough for either side, President Trump or Democrats on the Hill, to want to give even an inch.
Well, and the president has dug in his heels. He lost the House in the midterms. Does he see this, do you think, as his last chance to get the wall project funded?
A couple of things. He has made one rhetorical concession. He said you don't have to call it a wall. You can call it a fence. You can call it whatever you want. Nancy Pelosi, we just heard, called it a beaded curtain. He's not going to like that. But the president has made some small concession on that. But right now, neither side seems interested in giving anything. And Democrats, of course, know that they're going to be in power in the House of Representatives come January 3rd. So the president will have even less leverage. So these 2 years that the president has had in which he controlled the White House and Republicans controlled the House and the Senate, they were not able to get a significant amount of funding for the wall. It was the president's premier campaign promise, and now he's looking at the House being controlled by the opposition party and even less chance of getting what he wants.
Well, the president has said that his key opponents on this all supported improving the wall until he made it his campaign promise, and he made it his most important agenda item here in the White House. Is that fair?
Actually, there's a lot of truth to that. Congress passed with overwhelming majorities in 2006 something called the Secure Fence Act, which called for 700 miles of multiple-layer fencing across the border. And in 2013, with the Gang of Eight bill, the immigration reform bill that passed in the Senate but did not pass the House, every single Senate Democrat voted for that bill, which called for a southern border fencing strategy to build 700 miles of at least primary and perhaps even double layer fencing across the border. So in return, of course, Democrats got a path to citizenship for those in the country illegally. But yes, they have voted for big border barriers in the past.
The president has said it's about security, and we had the former ICE director, Tom Homan, on Fox and Friends this morning. He said that there were 138,000 criminals arrested last year, including 2,000 homicides, so people responsible for 2,000 murders and 11,000 sex crimes. These are people who were arrested last year crossing the border.
Well, the president has tried to make the point that a lot of crime is associated with illegal immigration. In other words, people come over the border who are not simply guilty of crossing illegally into the United States. So far, that hasn't worked. I mean, the Democrats have dug in their heels on this, and if you really do look at those votes I was talking about in 2006 and 2013, they have changed and are now against any new barrier on the southern border.
Well, we'll keep an eye on this one. Byron York from the Washington Examiner, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Rick.
Just days after the president announced U.S. troops would withdraw from Syria, the U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition conducts airstrikes against the terror group in Syria. What this means in the fight against ISIS.
Plus, trading about to get underway soon, so hang on. This after the Dow's worst Christmas Eve ever. So when will the market stabilize? A live report from Wall Street straight ahead.
They have record kinds of numbers. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to buy. Really a great opportunity.
And welcome back. 14 minutes after the hour now, and a major assault against ISIS in Syria. The U.S.-led military coalition announced that airstrikes and coordinated attacks destroyed ISIS facilities and removed several hundred fighters from the battlefield. The news comes just days after President Trump ordered the withdrawal of American troops from Syria. Let's bring in Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood, Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation. Colonel Wood, thanks for joining us today.
No, my pleasure. Thanks.
So I'm guessing this latest action probably leaves some people confused. The president had said we had defeated ISIS and that he was withdrawing as many as 2,000 troops. Now we're seeing airstrikes. Can you help us explain that?
Yeah, well, there's no contradiction. I mean, the U.S. will continue to have interests in the Middle East and take strikes as appropriate against entities like ISIS that threaten U.S. interests or prove to be a destabilizing force. But the president has talked about withdrawing the ground forces, the 2,000 or so troops that have been working with the Syrian democratic forces on the ground. So withdrawing ground forces is not the same thing as withdrawing from the region. And I think that's really the key point that needs to be made here.
And we know the attacks were carried out from December 16th through the 22nd in the Middle Euphrates River Valley, according to the news release from Operation Inherent Resolve, as this is called. What more can you tell us about how successful these airstrikes were and what they were intended to do?
Well, America's got a great precision strike capability. So as long as you can get a grid coordinate, then these bombs or missiles that are used, depending on the target being serviced, unerringly find their way to that target. So whether it's B-52s out of Al Udeid and Qatar or fighters out of Jordan, the munitions placed against the target are almost always very successful. So hitting command nodes, logistic and maintenance facilities that would support ISIS operations. Those are the types of things that really blunt the ability of the Islamic State to be effective at all. And we have to remember they used to control half of Syria and a third of Iraq, and all that's been taken away. So these are a few thousand fighters that are holding on, surrounded by enemies, and we really don't view them as being a significant threat to the United States in any way.
So there's been so much criticism against the president coming from both sides of the aisle about this withdrawal of troops. Should these airstrikes assuage people, and can we expect that these airstrikes will continue?
Oh, yes. I mean, we've got long-standing relationships in the region, whether it's Jordan or Israel, or continuing to work with Saudi Arabia on various issues. Turkey is a NATO ally. They have given assurances that they're going to help contain the ISIS problem as well. But whether we continue to hold U.S. ground forces there in Syria when it's in such turmoil as an internal problem, I mean, really that's at the heart of the debate. How long do you continue to be there? And the president's been frustrated by lack of clear answers on what's the theory of victory. I mean, conditions on the ground to drive these things, but what are those conditions? And with the SDF forces, holding their own, with Turkey having an interest in the region, we don't want to come into open confrontation with government of Syria forces. So he, as commander-in-chief of the military and as executive for the United States, has determined that the time for U.S. ground presence is at an end, but that certainly does not mean that we won't continue to prosecute targets that are aligned with our larger regional and strategic interests.
Okay, and you talk about our alliances in the region, and you mentioned Turkey as a NATO ally, but can we really rely on Turkey in that region to help defeat ISIS?
Oh, I think so. I mean, they have an enduring interest as well. So nobody wants a destabilizing entity like the Islamic State to hold terrain as they did in the past. I mean, nobody benefits from that. So Turkey has its own sovereign issues along its border, doesn't want the Islamic State problem falling over into it. They've got interests vis-a-vis Syria that are going on, and certainly with Iran and Iraq. So nobody wins if ISIS wins, and I think we can rely on folks in that region to take care of a domestic problem, an indigenous problem, something that's local to that area.
All right. Well, thank you so much for shedding light on that area for us. Lieutenant Colonel Dakota Wood, thanks for being with us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
In a 1-2 punch, a volcano erupts, sending clouds of ash into the air, now triggering an earthquake. Details on where this is happening.
Plus, new evidence in the mysterious disappearance of Kelsey Barrett, what investigators found 800 miles away from her Colorado home. Sicilians were awakened early Christmas morning by an earthquake. The 4.8 magnitude quake was triggered by Mount Etna's eruption. 10 people were injured, but thousands fled their homes in fear. Temporary shelters were set up for residents whose houses were damaged or were too frightened to return home.
Fox News alert, the New York Stock Exchange opens minutes from now after a massive sell-off saw the Dow dropping 653 points yesterday. It's worst showing, 2 days ago.
2 days ago.
Worst showing ever on a Christmas Eve. So Christina Parsonevelos of the Fox Business Network joins us to talk about that awful plunge.
Yeah, I was there. So I was on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange reporting there, and literally towards the end of the day, I spoke to one trader that said there's no incentive to buy right now or to even sell. He was just so shocked at the news that you had Mnuchin calling the banks asking about liquidity, about the 30 CEOs of the banks, and then the fact that you had the president taking to Twitter again to go after the Fed. So you had those two issues when they didn't need to be issues at that moment in time. Normally there's this, what investors like to call the Santa Claus rally, right before the holidays.
So it could have gone green, but they messed it all up.
We can't put the blame on them because there's just so many factors playing into these markets right now. Today you're seeing the futures in the green, so we could potentially.
Where are the futures right now?
The future, the Dow was up 170 points right before I came on set. S&P a little bit higher, not much, but just by a few points. But nonetheless, you have so many factors playing into these markets. It's not just Twitter and people on Twitter, but it has to do with the fear of a slowdown in 2019 and what that means for corporations. It has to do with the high level of debt that some of these corporations have, and it has to do with political instability, foreign instability. The oil, if you look at oil, it's below $45 US a barrel at the moment.
Which seems good to me because gas prices are super low.
Gas right now is on average, I think it's according to Gas Buddy, $2.31.
Okay, but so the Dow has taken a huge hit. And now it seems like a good time to buy. People are saying, you buy low and you sell high.
Right.
These are low. So
the buy on the dip is the mentality that you would say. See, I think that if you are a seasoned investor that understands that if you're going to take on some losses in the near future, you can handle it. So yes, you have some of these wealthy people, and we have on Fox Business all the time, they have funds that are worth a lot of money, and they're buying right now.
They are.
For somebody that's maybe watching at home and wants to invest, a few few thousand here and there individually. Hey, I like this, I like Walmart, or I like this company. It's a little bit riskier because of the headwinds going into 2019. The benefits of the tax cuts, we're not going to see those anymore, right? That was the benefits this year.
Sure.
So there's a lot of factors that play into next year. So it's good to be cautious, which is why you're seeing even the price of gold go higher, because it's often seen as a safe haven.
You mentioned the president yesterday blamed the rising interest rates, and he also blamed the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, and that gave some people some uncertainty. And I'm wondering if that continues. Like, are we worried about what might happen there? And with his Treasury Secretary.
Right. With the comments, normally you don't have a president, and it's happened before, but normally you're not as vocal about the federal chairman, Jay Powell.
Are you saying this president is different from previous presidents? Because I've never heard that before.
I mean, you got to talk about the issue at hand, the concern about the markets, but the Fed needs to be independent. That's the most important thing. They're not supposed to play to politics. They're not supposed to play to investors on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. Just because investors don't like what he's doing right now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for the economy. We've had such low interest rates across the board for quite some time, and this hike right now is still within the 2% range. So it's not like it's going to inhibit growth that much when you're seeing a hike. And think of all the debt that is growing. It's been cheap money for too long. So if anything, you have retail sales came out super strong. Unemployment, it's the lowest we've seen since December, 1969. You're seeing 7.1 million job openings across the country.
Let's cut to the chase here.
We don't even have the people.
The president does know business, and he knows the economy, and he turned this market around when he took the office. Is it going to bounce back?
If I could accurately say that, then maybe I wouldn't be working here. I'd be
When is it bouncing back?
When is it bouncing back? I think that there will be a rally in the few coming weeks. Why? Because it's a lot of people that are buying on the dip right now, and you have earnings coming out again, the next set of earnings, and they're expected to be strong once again. Will that tiny rally hold? I'm not so sure. I think it's going to be weaker in 2019.
Oh boy.
But we got to end on a positive note, though. So there is an opportunity out there. You just need to know how to play the market.
All right. Well, we'll learn as quickly as we can. Christina Partsinevelos, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the death toll climbs in Indonesia after a powerful tsunami struck the coastline, killing more than 400 people. Why an early warning system was never triggered. Plus, on day 5 of the partial government shutdown, both sides are still at odds over border security.
But many of those workers have said to me and communicated, stay out until you get the funding for the wall. These federal workers want the wall. The only one that doesn't want the wall are the Democrats.
Okay, Fox News alert now. Stocks opening for trading on Wall Street, and the numbers are looking a little better today, up about 145 right now. That's a lot better than what we saw for the last couple of days.
It's going to be up 1,000.
1,000?
In a matter of minutes.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I like that prediction.
I just want to see if I can make it happen.
Okay, we'll watch that.
I'm not supposed to do that, right?
No.
Okay.
Get us in trouble.
Well, go down. Fox News alert now. Israel carrying out more strikes near the Syrian capital Damascus, injuring 3 Syrian soldiers, according to state media. This is just days after Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel could expand military action against Iran and its troops in Syria. Trey Yingst is live from Jerusalem with more on this. Trey?
Rick, overnight, warplanes launched a series of airstrikes towards Iranian targets in Syria. While the Israelis are not immediately taking credit for these strikes, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here in Jerusalem did say earlier this month that his country would be ramping up attacks on Iranian proxies around Israel. Now, Syrian state media does claim that the strikes targeting Damascus were unsuccessful, though online video shows multiple impacts of missiles near the country's biggest airport. In response to the wave of strikes, the Syrians launched anti-aircraft missiles at the warplanes. One of those anti-aircraft missiles missed and entered Israeli airspace. The event triggered an air defense system in central Israel, according to the IDF. Now, a military spokesperson did add there was no damage or injuries reported. The Russian Defense Ministry says Syrian air defenses destroyed 14 of the 16 missiles fired on the Syrian capital. The strikes come after months of quiet following an incident in September where Syrian anti-aircraft missiles attempted to shoot down an Israeli plane, leading to a Russian military aircraft being shot down. Now, earlier this month, Rick, I did speak with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and asked him about Iranian proxies. He said that Israel is prepared to do whatever it takes to defend their country. Rick?
We've certainly seen that. Trey Yingst in Jerusalem. Trey, thank you.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
Well, President Trump saying he'd take responsibility for a government shutdown, but in an op-ed, the New York Post writing that Senator Chuck Schumer doesn't deserve a pass, saying, quote, President Trump may deserve all the heat he's getting for his bumbling role in triggering a government shutdown over the border wall funding, but Democrats, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer in particular, are no angels. Ted Harvey is chairman of the Committee to Defend the President and a former Colorado state senator, and Jim Kessler is former legislative policy director to Senator Chuck Schumer, also senior vice president for policy and a co-founder of The Third Way. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning.
So let me ask you about that article in the New York Post that says you can blame the president all you want for the shutdown, and as you heard him say, he would take all the blame, but that Chuck Schumer could end this thing tomorrow if he could just look past his hatred of the president and move 1 inch on funding for border security. Jim, you know Senator Schumer very well. At some point, are people going to start pointing fingers at him?
Well, then let's get out of the make-pretend world here, because there was a 17-minute video that we all watched on live television where Donald Trump said, I will take the blame on this. Schumer has tried on several occasions to reach agreement with Donald Trump on the wall. They had an agreement on $25 billion. They had another agreement. He's backed away each time. Look, I think the president wants this showdown because he's had the worst month of his presidency. He had the Mattis resignation, the Flynn fiasco, and the plunging stock market. This is a distraction he wants right now, and I think he's playing that up to the hilt.
Well, Ted, you work for the Committee to Defend the President, and I guess he's not making it so easy for you right now, huh? Do the American people buy the notion that the shutdown is all his fault, though? And what do his supporters want to see him do? Do they want him to stand firm on this border wall funding?
Of course they want him to stand firm. This is the reason why the president won the primary 2 years ago against 16 formidable Republican candidates. He's the only one that picked up the immigration banner. It's the reason why he won the general election against Hillary Clinton, because he picked up the immigration banner. Remember, it was Chuck Schumer 12 months ago that closed down the border, closed down the government in support of allowing illegal immigrants to come across the border. Here we go again. Chuck Schumer's not coming to the table and funding this effort. Not one Democrat voted for it in the House when it came out last week. And here we go again in the Senate, where the Democrats are holding up funding the border. They are supporting illegal immigrants. They're supporting MS-13. They're supporting drug traffickers and human traffickers. If that's what they want to take to the American public, good for them.
Jim, yesterday the president spoke from the Oval Office, and he talked about a fence, a barrier, a gate. He called it several different things. Do you think any of those things sound more amenable to Chuck Schumer? And what kind of border security would he be in favor of?
So let's just be clear. There are 16,000 border security guards on the border right now. There's 700 miles of fencing on the border right now. That is Democrats and Republicans working together over the last 8 or 10 years. The Senate bill that passed unanimously, so that's McConnell, Schumer, and 98 other senators, had $1.6 billion for the wall that included 70 miles of new fencing and 400 new personnel. So there's border security going on there. The only answer isn't we're going to build a wall that can be defeated by a shovel or a ladder. There's a lot of ways to secure the border.
Okay. Ted, what do you say about that?
Well, if you remember last year, Chuck Schumer shut down the government because he wanted to support DACA students, but he didn't want to do anything about the border. He didn't want to end chain migration. And here we go again. Schumer is not going to negotiate in any way whatsoever. But Schumer said there is no negotiation. We are not going to move forward with any negotiation. We are not going to fund the wall. That is the message that the Democrats are sending to the American people. And if that's the message that they want to send, they certainly can, but their senators who are in tight races in 2020 are going to have to take that to the American people. And let's have that debate. If they want to support illegal immigrants, we can have that debate, or we can debate securing the American border and stopping MS-13, drug traffickers, and human traffickers.
Well, the president...
Then we're all going to have to pretend two things: that we didn't watch a 17-minute video in the Oval Office where President Trump said, I'm going to shut down the wall, and we have to remember that Mexico is supposed to pay for this wall. Mexico is supposed to pay for this wall.
If you want to take that to the voters,
is a lot to spend for a bumper sticker and to fulfill a lie of the president.
Let's not talk over each other here. We can't hear you. Okay, we're out of time. But thank you so much for coming. And, you know, of course, this debate is going to continue. Hopefully we'll see some action soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
The death toll in the tsunami that struck Indonesia rising to at least 430 people, with many more still missing as that country struggles to recover from a massive wave that devastated the coastline. Thousands are homeless amid fears that more tsunamis might hit. Amy Kellogg joins us live from Milan, Italy. Amy, what's the latest?
Hi, Rick. Well, people really are frightened that this could happen again because the volcano that caused the tsunami on Saturday is still very active. So people are scared that another one could happen again without any warning. So at this point, people are being told by the authorities to stay inside, stay away from the coast, rather, at least for now. And that means staying at least, Rick, a good half-mile inland until it can be determined that this is not likely to happen again. Now, there has been rain, unfortunately, and plenty of misery, of course, as people try to stay comfortable and healthy in shelters. Others are still looking around desperately for their loved ones. The hope of finding survivors at this point is quite slim, but anyone still looking for family or friends is holding out hope. I saw a really heartbreaking interview this morning, Rick. You know, these personal stories trickle out helter-skelter, and there was a man who had taken his whole family to an outdoor concert on Saturday. A wave, the tsunami, smashed into that concert. He managed to survive, lost track of his family, found the bodies of his wife and his daughter in two different places, and is still going around quite desperately looking for his son, whose body has not been found, who has not been heard from since Saturday, Rick.
Just awful. Amy Kellogg in Milan. Amy, thank you for that.
Well, it wasn't much of a white Christmas here in the U.S., but the trip home might be another story. Blizzard conditions could make travel very rough in the upper Midwest. Meteorologist Adam Klotz joins us now from the Fox Weather Center with the forecast. How's it looking out there?
Well, you nailed it. There's going to be a big winter system that might slow down some folks, and it always happens when warm air runs into cold air. There's this pool of temperatures in the 60s in the middle of the country, but you fall just back behind it in Denver, Colorado, 21 degrees. Well, where that warm air and cold air meets, that's where this system's beginning to fire off. Everything to the southern portions is just heavy rain, but the northern portions of this system, that's where we're seeing snowfall so far and are going to here the next couple of days. Currently, snow falling across the Dakotas, stretching back off towards the west. This is going to continue to slowly shift off towards the east here over the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, all of these locations under at least, we're looking at winter storm advisory, so watches and warnings. Everything in the pink is the warning, which is the most severe. That's stretching from portions of northern Wisconsin all the way back across the Dakotas, Nebraska, and then getting back towards Colorado. This is going to be a slow-moving march, and so you're going to get rounds and rounds of activity. This is a future forecast, and you see everything on the back side. The air's too warm in front, so it's rain, but everything back behind this storm is constantly, we're talking about constant snowfall, which over 48 hours time, which is about how long this is going to linger, is able to add up. Now, fairly widespread, everything you're looking at here is getting in that 6-inch range. There are some isolated areas where the colors get a little bit darker, and we're showing you perhaps spots getting up to a foot of total snow, again, coming down relatively quickly. It's all along this frontal boundary, so we're going to be watching it move the next couple of days. Here's your Wednesday temperatures. Again, everything in front of here is all just rain and thunderstorms. That's where the line moves. By Thursday, this line's moving into the Midwest. But if you're along the East Coast, maybe this is good news for you because it's feeling fantastic. We're getting closer to the new year, and we've got temperatures New York City by Friday, temperatures in the mid-50s. So we're going to be watching this storm in the middle of the country, but there's plenty of other places where it is going to be warm as we ring in the new year. Back to you.
43 in Chicago. That's T-shirt weather.
I know. Jeez. Yep. What's going on?
I don't know, but I'm sure the people in New York will be happy that it's not sub-zero on New Year's Eve.
That's true.
Well, a holiday boat trip turned Almost deadly for one family as their cabin cruiser goes up in flames off the coast of Australia.
And the investigation into the death of a Colorado mother expands to Idaho as her fiancé is charged with first-degree murder.